Jesus, nobody in the sky. Moonshine Jesus, baby, don't lie. Moonshine Jesus, a surprising delight. Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Hello and welcome to the Moonshine Jesus Show. We are back after a week off. We are back. We are here as promised. We are revisiting the part 2, Rebel Moon. We did part 1. We had some pretty pointed feelings about part 1, and we promised to do part 2 anyway. And so we're back doing Rebel Moon part 2, the Scargiver. And as always, as you've heard, I am joined by my good buddy Caleb. How you doing today, Caleb?
Oh, I'm doing fine, Mark. Even though we're talking about Rebel Moon Part 2, we're going to have a good time with this. I'm glad to be here with you. We always have a fun time when we're together.
Indeed. Absolutely. We're going to dig into this. First, we need to let people know and remind them that we are sponsored by progressivechristianity.org, a fantastic place for all of your progressive Christian needs. All kinds of resources there. Please go check them out, as well as the Moonshine Jesus Show. Follow us on Facebook. Make sure that you are downloading us at wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode. And we do need to remind you, as always, this is a spoiler-full zone. We will spoil as if Zack Snyder didn't already do it by making the dang thing. We are going to spoil part 2 of Rebel Moon for you, so be ready for that. And Caleb, there is just absolutely no way we make it through talking about this particular show without some kind of a beverage. What did you go with, sir?
Okay, so the Rebel Moon, I think, is an interesting little place that Zack Snyder has chosen to make kind of like Irish, I think. That
does
seems
seem to
cultural.
have a little of that in there. I'll give you that.
Did you get that? Yeah. So
there's some of that feel.
I thought I'm not going to make a cocktail today because I just want straight alcohol to deal with this, and so I poured myself some Irish whiskey. So I've got a double of Irish whiskey to start.
Lovely.
That's what I am drinking.
I like it.
How about you?
Well, I took a moon-themed cocktail, and this is quite a gory episode, part 2.
It is.
So I'm doing what is named a Bloody Moon. It's bourbon, red wine, vermouth, pomegranate juice, and a couple of dashes of orange bitters, and you get this kind of creepy, bloody-looking color to it. So I'm going with the Bloody Moon. Since we end up with quite a bloody moon on the episode. So cheers,
Mark.
I cannot wait to see where we go with our discussion on this one, sir.
Down goes alcohol.
Moonshine Jesus, Moonshine Jesus, Moonshine Jesus, Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. We're entering our geek out section because Mark and I are geeks. We like to geek out, right, Mark? And even if it's something like Rebel Moon, we're going to geek out about it. But don't worry, we won't spend too long here. We'll move right on along to talk about theology and politics. So in case you're not familiar with Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon, we're talking about part 2 of the Scargiver, and it is a continuation of Zack Snyder's much inferior version of any Star Wars you choose. Say maybe that Star Wars Christmas special. Maybe it's better than that.
Maybe.
But maybe. In this episode, we see the rebels defend their moon, Velt. And half of the movie, Mark, is them preparing to defend the moon. And the other half of the movie is them actually defending the moon. And so
it is a very complex storyline.
That's the summary of the movie right there. So, Okay, so I've given a summary of the movie. So here's my question, Mark. This is where I want to start. So there were some deaths. We discovered that the princess we all knew would be alive was still alive. I mean, you and I both predicted that at the end of the last episode. So aside from that, Mark, was anything at all narratively accomplished in this episode? Like, was there any point for this even being a movie? If we just skip this episode and went to whatever the next episode is going to be, would we have lost anything? That's my question for you to start out.
That is actually a brilliant observation. Because, I mean, you think about it, Atticus Noble, the kind of big bad, dies at the end of the last movie. And he dies at the end of this movie.
So, that's right. He's resurrected to be killed again. Yes. Ends up in the same spot.
We get the backstory of the, I'm going to call them Magnificent Seven, the people they went and recruited last time. But they all have the same freaking backstory.
Yes, that's right. They've been abused by the Empire.
No, I'm sorry, not the Empire, the Imperial, because that's different. Imperium, or whatever they're calling them, came and destroyed our village. So yes, I'm out to get them. So that doesn't really. Gunner dies.
We get
like the only change is Gunner dies, so I assume it's going to have some impact on Cora. And dang it, I just stole one of my own. Make me look stupid questions.
Yes,
I'm in trouble, man. We're only a few minutes into this, and you managed to get me to steal my own.
Oh, now that's next level, man. That is next level. I feel pretty good about that.
Really,
look,
your game here.
Okay, look, yeah. So some people die because Nemesis dies too, but they could have also easily made that a part of the final battle at the end of the first movie, and and we wouldn't have even needed this movie. So I really struggled to, and I mean, I think we found out exactly how the princess died in flashback sequences, but
we get to find out how Cora's involvement and the betrayal of her adopted father.
Right, but I mean, that's also like we're talking. I mean, the fact that we sat here for like 2 minutes trying to come up with something that needed to be there, I think says something. And the part that we could summarize it in like a sentence, I think says something about it too. So
yeah, exactly.
I'm also kind of curious about this, Mark.
Yeah.
So not much narratively happened in this movie. The movie has been critically panned. I mean, we're talking like less than 20, like maybe around 20% Rotten Tomato scores. The audiences also didn't like this movie. So who exactly is Zack Snyder and Netflix? Who are they making these movies for?
Zack Snyder is making it for Zack Snyder. That's it. That is it. This is his big flex. If I have a name and I wanted to do Star Wars and they let me, so I'm going to do it anyway. And this is for me. That's for who that Netflix, I think, is almost doing it for the same reason. This whole thing felt a little like it didn't spend enough time in production. And I think they were basically rushing to get out some kind of space opera opposite of Disney releasing several Disney Star Wars things about this time of the year on their channel. And so I think Netflix, this was the only thing they had in their chute that would be kind of right up against it.
Get it out there.
They had to get it out there. That'd be my guess. I don't know. I mean, what do you think of that? I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. And I think maybe the diehard Zack Snyder fans. And so, I mean, one thing you can say about Zack Snyder.
I saw a review from a Zack Snyder fan, and you could tell the poor guy
even that was
knew that he you could tell he knew that he was working way too hard to try to find redeeming qualities. I'm sorry, I stepped on where you were going with that. I just had to.
No, I
out
really
there.
wanted to know. No,
Yeah.
I think maybe some of the Zack Snyder fans, because I think one thing you can say about Zack Snyder movies is that they all tend to be pretty much the same. I mean, I from 300 to Watchmen to Justice League to Rebel Moon. I mean, we get
Yeah.
the same kind of overdone action sequences, slow
Don't forget
motion.
Superman versus Batman.
Yeah,
One of the worst Zack Snyder films ever.
I'm trying to forget that one.
That's fair.
So
That's fair.
yeah, so I just think that that I'm not sure exactly who this is for, and I
Yeah.
think everything from that to even the scoring. And so, Mark, you know, I like to watch closed captions while I'm watching movies, and
I don't understand you at all, man.
you know, I gotta have them. And so one of the things that I noticed is the scoring of this movie. That
Yeah.
what I got in the closed captions was
Disembodied
ominous
voice.
music playing, foreboding music playing, rousing music, melancholy underscoring, and to me it just underscores like the joylessness of Rebel Moon. And so
But that's sort of true of Snyder movies, right?
It's kind of true of
He's
Snyder
all about
movies,
the
right?
dark stuff. He washes
Yeah.
out the color to keep it dark and brooding.
Yes.
The music's
Yeah.
always kind of dark and brooding.
Yeah.
There's not any real character development that can lift the story. It's kind of it's
Yeah.
like every character is just a piece of a plank, a piece of wood with a face painted on it.
the
Like
robot.
What's the cartoon?
I mean,
with Planky, you know.
I think the robot has the most range of
Oh,
emotion in
well, I mean,
in this movie.
you give
It's
Anthony Hopkins anything, and
right?
he's
Yeah.
going to just knock it out of the park. And I'm with you. Like, but that just shows what a bad choice of directing. I was about to make a very big blanket statement about Zack Snyder, but a bad choice of directing here is that Jimmy, the robot, the android that he plays, is sort of like the most interesting, engaging character, and we just keep him brooding off in the distance all the time, just kind of gazing at what's going on and barely being involved. And there's your selling character. Like, if you want a franchise,
yes, Jimmy,
which is what he seems to be trying to do with all of this, is to build this new franchise. Jimmy's the way to go here, right? Is engaging.
I think so.
Yeah.
That's right. He's actually got some kind of struggle, and like I said, the most emotional range. And I think I mean, the fact that Anthony Hopkins is in this movie, and you don't know necessarily that it's Anthony Hopkins. So I went through the cast and crew, and I'm like, wait, Anthony Hopkins was in this movie? Where was Anthony Hopkins? I feel like I missed. I'm like, oh, he's a robot that we didn't get to see. And oh, I think it's worth noting, Mark, that we do have at least one fan of this movie, and that's Majin, who's watching live right now, who says this movie is amazing Star Wars fan fiction. And but there's like a laughing emoji. So Majin, I need to know if that's sarcasm, if you're a real fan of this movie.
I feel fairly certain Majin
you think it's sarcasm? Okay.
Was ribbing
us
a little bit.
Thank you, Majin, for being
very
with us.
much
Okay,
so, because you're
Mark,
right.
though, I feel like we can't get out of this segment without saying something positive about this movie. And I think you think so. Here's what I think. The same thing that we frequently. Oh, okay. Majin's clarified. It is sarcasm. Sorry, Majin. Thanks for being with us. I thought for just a moment that maybe we'd found an actual fan of the movie, but if you're out there and you're a fan of the movie, let us know.
I appreciated that, Majin. It made me laugh.
Hey, look. The cinematography's good. Some of the shots are beautiful.
I've heard some people bashing it, and I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think that there are many times where the cinematography is actually stunning, where you could freeze frame it, and that's really just is well crafted. There's a great depth.
Yeah.
Even though he's washed out colors, there's moments where it's actually kind of beautiful the way it's been washed out. I completely agree. Can I give a but?
Yeah.
You're trying to be
Well,
positive.
we're trying to keep it positive, Mark.
Sometimes the
give us the-
CGI was
the-
just so absolutely
It
horrifically bad.
was pretty
It
bad.
looked like someone at a film school who was just starting to learn CGI did it. I mean, there were moments that was very good, but there were other moments where it was like, holy moly, how did anyone say, yeah, let's go with that?
Yeah. Maybe this is the rushing to production thing that you were talking about. The
Score
getting
was
out
pretty
like
good. Score was pretty good. It really
Yeah.
was. It was dark and brooding, but it was a pretty
Yeah.
good score. Like it's.
I mean, it
always
was
seemed to do
appropriate for the
job.
movie.
Yeah, it seemed to do the job he was looking for sure.
Yes,
Sure.
that's right. That's right. And I
And
mean,
I will say this: they weren't given the script nor the backstories to really develop characters, but I think most of the actors were really good at what they were given to work with. I honestly do believe that. Yeah.
fair enough. Yeah, I mean, it's not like they maybe they weren't given the script, but I mean, even if they were, I mean, it's not like there's any character development
not any
in the
depth.
script. Like,
mean, they
be
literally-
mad at the
in the middle-
Imperium.
In the middle
they
of the
killed
movie,
someone important to you. Yeah.
in the middle of the movie, they literally set them around the table and say, "Hey, I got an idea. Why don't we all just go around the table and tell people about our backstory? Like that's what you don't do. Like, if you, oh my God, that's how he decided to try to build a backstory to what I'm calling the Magnificent Seven. Try to build the backstory.
The Magnificent Seven. I like that.
Because there were 7 of them, I'm pretty sure.
There are 7. Yeah.
To build the backstory of them in a way that we really cared. Okay, so 1, that's a bad way to do that. 2, you gave them the same backstory with just a little bit of change each time. I mean, come on.
They
Come
literally,
on.
we could have heard 1, and we could have heard, oh yeah, me too. That's same.
Everybody,
that's
yep,
the same thing.
yep. Same thing.
Yep,
It
yep,
was my
yep,
mom,
yeah.
not my dad. It was
Yeah.
it was like, but yeah. So
Yeah.
many issues, man. But it was
Yeah,
pretty at times, and the music was absolutely. I think the music was done very well, honestly.
It was, and yeah, that's right. And I'm thinking about, in particular, the kind of freeze frame moments you were talking about, Mark. I think the one where they kind of zoom out and you can see kind of the planet in the background of the that's a visual image I was left with. And I think it was also some of the promotional material, but
Probably.
but there were some really pretty things, and we're also seeing some folks commenting about how this was originally a Star Wars movie, and about some of the backstory stuff. And I think that is important to point out, if you didn't catch our first episode on Rebel Moon, that this was kind of Zack Snyder's take on Star Wars, and that this was his version of it. And I think I can safely say that, Mark, as critical as people have been of the Star Wars sequels, that it still feels like the right choice not to have let Zack Snyder direct any of those.
I think so. For all of their faults, Lucasfilm, they've made some choices that are questionable. And you and I both big Star Wars fans, and we can both admit that Lucasfilm has definitely made some questionable.
Yeah,
this one they got right when they told Zack Snyder, "This isn't for us." I think that they were at least this time they were like hitting on all targets, man. They knew what they were doing when they said, "We like you, Zack. You've done some big great movies, but this one maybe not." Like, look, honestly. Think about him pitching. Think about him pitching a movie where the Empire, because he pitched it as a Star Wars, right? The Empire has out on the edges of where they rule. They have this massive empire. They have one of their dreadnought class ships out there, and they are in such bad shape that they have to go down to a moon and basically stiff arm the residents for grain. The Empire, like the ruling, and that everything is motivated and activated off of We need food.
we need some grain from
I
this
wish-
moon.
I would have loved to have been at that pitch meeting and watched the faces of the executives that look at him and go, I'm sorry, what? What?
Uh,
They need wheat.
The
The
wheat
empire needs
from the moon.
wheat.
And
I-
this one moon's going to produce enough for the empire.
For
Yeah,
everybody.
yeah. No, thanks, Zach. Thanks.
Yeah.
Go back and
We're gonna pass on this
continue
one.
go continue messing up the DCEU stuff.
Yeah,
It's kind of like Quentin Tarantino pitching a Star Trek movie, just like maybe not the
Maybe
right
not.
feel for that.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
think it's also
yeah.
important to say as we're ending this segment that
Yeah.
Mark Mikowski has said that he knew the backstory stuff was filler, and
Oh, yeah.
I think it was filler in this movie. And if you are giving people backstory that's supposed to serve as their main motivation for the events of the movie, if that feels like backstory, I think that means that we've kind of missed the mark on that. So,
Yeah,
hey,
yeah.
Mark, I would love to continue complaining
Trashing
about
the
this
movie?
movie with you, trashing the movie with you, but
Right.
or looking for some silver linings or something. But
Yeah.
let's move on to theology and politics. That's what we're here to do. So let's take a quick break
Absolutely.
and come back and talk about theopolitico stuff in Rebel Moon.
Welcome back. Thank you for joining us for our Theopolitico segment. Well, Caleb, we've already mentioned that this is a pretty thin storyline. So, as you might imagine, as I'm watching, realizing that I'm the person with the Theopolitico questions, I'm going, oh boy, this is going to be interesting work. So, this is my way of an apology.
I was very glad, Mark, that you were doing that because I thought,
Oh, I
hey,
imagine.
I
I would have.
talk about how crappy of a movie this is, and Mark gets to struggle for some themes in this. Yeah.
So that's my way of apologizing for my long setups to these questions, because I got to work my way to a question. So with that said, I do have long setups, so I'm going to go ahead and ask the first one. So early in this movie, part 2, we see a flashback where Cora is directed by her ruthless adopted father, the regent Balisaurus, to kill the young princess who she was charged with actually protecting. And Balisaurus makes the king watch as Cora supposedly kills the princess, and then he kills the king and the queen, and then he immediately blames Cora for killing the whole royal family, and then quickly the dozens of people present who witnessed the whole thing follow his lead and also starts accusing her, right?
Yes, right.
What is it about that kind of leader that causes people to blindly follow? And where do you see that kind of behavior in the U.S.?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of times people follow others that they're afraid of and that seem unstable, and so I think Trump is the perfect example of where we've seen this. Or sometimes there's kind of a misguided notion that if people are kind of unstable, that they can also be easily manipulated, and I think that often. And by often I mean almost never ends up being true. And so like I see the the Republican Party in the US, I think one of the reasons that they leaned into Trump was because they thought that he could be easily controlled. And that was clearly not the case. That he just did whatever he wanted. He had no interest in playing politics as usual, nor did he seem to have any interest in the actual stability of the United States, like continuing to operate as a country. And so I think that's part of it. But I think that people then, once they see the unpredictable nature of that and kind of follow fall behind, step in line because the person is so unpredictable. And so I think that that's the state that we now find the Republican Party in, is that they're falling behind Trump, even though he's completely unpredictable, even though he's clearly broken laws, even though he encouraged people to mount an insurrection against the country.
Yeah.
That even Republicans who a few years ago would have said that they wanted what's best for the country, that they wanted to find some kind of way to reach across the aisle. We don't find any of that anymore, and it's because they're falling in lockstep with Trump. I think because he's unpredictable, and they want to be on the right side if he finds himself back in power. That's my take on it. How about yours?
No, I agree with everything you said. I also just think there's just this. Life is hard. And it's easy to fall into just wanting something easy. It's not the same as being lazy. It's actually an honest response to the difficulty of life, of just wanting something to just that I can just follow and buy into. And really strong, charismatic, fear-mongering leaders are easy to do that with, because particularly if you're a part of the surrounding group, they're frightening people, and you don't want to be the subject of their anger or their direct trying to impact you. And so I think that's part of what's going on, and what we see even in the characters here is that there's this strong, charismatic leader who just killed off the king and queen and got his own child or adopted child to kill the princess, and then immediately flip. Like, there's some craziness there that's frightening. I do think that there's a real direct comparison between the way that Trump values himself over all other people, even his own children, and is willing to throw people under the bus, and that there's a lot of folks who have a hard life, who are struggling, and following a leader like that is easy. It's just, and it keeps the anger and the negativity from being focused at them. I think there's a lot more that we can unpack there, but I want to get into a few other questions. And like I said, I got long setups, so I need a little effort. After being revived from death, or at least near death, Admiral Noble tells his second in command that he wants to leave the scar on his chest that Cora made when she tried to kill him. And he says he wants to keep it to show people, after he arrests her, as a symbol that he is their savior. Jesus complex much. And he also, even as he's doing it, he's got he's kind of dressed like Jesus is sometimes depicted on the cross. And he's got his arms out wide, just like someone who is on a cross as this happens. So my question is, what are your thoughts on savior figures in movies that pull from Christian imagery? And then what do you think about it when it's the antagonist in the show? What do you, and ultimately, what do you think is trying to be said by Zack Snyder by doing it that?
Yeah, so I think it can be dangerous in movies when we see a kind of a savior figure, and I think it's the same thing that's dangerous in Christianity when we make Jesus into the savior who does something one time, and then we're saved for all of eternity. And I think that movies tend to do that as well. And I think a better notion of salvation is something that's ongoing and communal. And so that if we see salvation as something communal that we're doing together as a group, I think that that's a more powerful view of salvation. So I think that as a culture, we have a problematic view of what a savior is. And certainly Christianity, I think, misinterprets a lot of Jesus's message. And so I think certainly that when we see the antagonist presented in those ways, it's it's complicated. I think
it really is.
It certainly isn't maybe I think Christianity has some problematic theology, and that points that out to us in some ways. And I think sometimes that's the point, is that we're supposed to see that this view of a savior is problematic, and that sure, it could be someone who's going to do something good for us, or it could be someone who's going to do something really horrible. And I think bringing this
Yeah.
back around to Trump again, that the religious right, I think, viewed in many ways Trump as a savior figure, even if they recognize
Mhm.
that much of what he did wasn't religious or compatible with Christianity, that the religious right kind of put him in this on this pedestal where he was going to bring in the right Supreme Court judges and was going to
Right.
get Roe v. Wade overturned, right, which ended up happening.
Mhm.
And so I think now that that he's like on the loose and stuff, we have to figure out how to deal with that. So I think Zack Snyder certainly seems to be, to me, pointing out this danger of
Yeah.
a one savior kind of complex.
Mhm.
And I think it's interesting that the way that the that person is ultimately defeated is by people banding together, and rebels on a moon who are peasant farmers
Yeah.
finding a way to unite and kind of overcome that. So
I want
anyway,
to. I
that's
want
my
to. I want to.
long-winded
I
take.
want. No, I love that answer, and I like where you
Yeah.
finished it. And I agree with you. And I want to use
Yeah.
your ending about people banding together to get to one last question. We're going to try to squeeze in here. So in the end, they saved the moon by people not just banding together on the moon, but also people from other worlds. The blood axes, they come in their ships to come and kind of finish off the battle. So we see people on the planet, as well as people from other worlds, from different worlds, coming together with them. Now, disregarding that it was necessary to do it with violence and that kind of thing, at least the way the story was told there. Uh, is there a lesson that we should learn from that banding together, even if we come from different worlds?
Yeah.
Is there a lesson we should learn, and how do we go about teaching that lesson to others as well?
Yeah, I think certainly coming together despite differences is important. I mean, that's one of the values I think that we have as progressive Christians, is trying to unite together despite differences. And I
Mhm.
think that's something that certainly we should be striving towards. But man, it can be hard too. And I think especially here in the United States, we've really been learning that lesson as we have had a harder time coming across political divides. That
Yeah.
I think part of what we ought to be doing in the church and as a society is teaching each other to value one another without like making blanket statements, without assuming things about other people, and that's hard to do. But I think the way you do that is through relationships, through building relationships, through maintaining relationships, even when it's hard. And so I think one place that I see this as a real challenge right now is when we're thinking about what's happening in Palestine, right? That
Sure.
you've
Absolutely.
got say interfaith relationships that have been maybe strong, and you see those kind of falling apart because of differences in how that situation is viewed. And so I think trying to maintain relationships while also calling out injustice, like say genocide, is
Yeah.
something that really is tough, but is really worth doing. So I don't know that I came
Absolutely.
up with an answer for how you
Yeah.
do that, but maybe
Well, I
you
think
have
in
a
some ways
solution.
you did. I think in some ways you did. You basically were inferring that you do it by leading with example and showing that that's how to go about doing that. And I, once again, that's a question that we can unpack. Could
Yeah,
unpack, but we would have to take another 20 minutes to do that. But I
right.
think that's one of the things through relationship, and specifically through examples within relationships and showing folks how to
Yeah,
go about that and how necessary it is. Our last two questions really talked about the divides, and we need to figure out how do we come together and overcome the fact, yes, we all might come from different worlds, different world perspectives, but what's important is figuring out how to come together in a
yeah,
way that promotes the greater good rather than the good of one world or the other. And I
yeah,
think we see too much of that in the US right now, particularly
yeah,
from the far right, of trying to promote the good of just one world rather than recognize the value in all of them.
yeah.
We could go on and on. if we had more time, but we don't have more time. And we don't want to miss out on our favorite segment, the Make Me Look Stupid segment. So we're going to take a quick drop and we'll be back on the other side.
Welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. Thanks for hanging out with us this whole time as we've been talking about the Rebel Moon Part 2. And Mark, I've got to say, what a wonderful job you did of finding theology and political themes in a movie where there wasn't a whole lot of story, and half the movie was literally just a battle. So I'm impressed.
I feel like I'm glad you're impressed, because I feel like even as I was reading the questions, I was like, man, you're having to do some serious gymnastics to get to the question.
Sometimes theological content is like that,
Fair enough. How about that?
But I'm glad that we have reached this segment, the Make Me Look Stupid segment, where we can either try to make each other look stupid, or we can try and ask each other some questions that maybe we've been wondering about. And so, Mark, we do find that maybe one of the most substantial pieces of narrative that also maybe was executed poorly, but still is the time whenever we see them sitting around the table and going around their backstories. And I'm curious, did you get any Last Supper vibes from that? And if so, what theologically do you think that means?
I did get it just from the way they staged it. They literally wasn't anyone sitting on one side of the table. I guess so it makes a better camera shot. I don't know. I was like, really? You're going to be that obvious with this? You're going to go with that? I think that he might have been trying to go for that, but honestly, the fact that all the backstories were the same, I guess I see it in two ways. One, the disciples all came from different walks of life and had different backstories. And so the fact that they're all the same, I'm like, you kind of blew it. But at the same time, I guess on a really kind of more philosophical level, the disciples all had different backstories. But at the same time, while our backstories are different, our backstories are the same. We're all people who struggle to find love, struggle to find meaning. And so I guess that maybe there's a little bit there. Maybe
you're giving him a lot of credit, Mark.
What did you see in it besides the setup?
Yeah, I think that maybe I've changed my opinion about this a little bit based on your questions. I think your questions have helped me to appreciate this maybe a little bit more. That I think what I ended up seeing was that it was a bit communal, and so I saw that there wasn't a single savior, right? But it was a communal salvation, and so it was kind of a Last Supper, but without a single savior figure dying, like everyone being there, kind of equivalent. And so certainly I think it was kind of a narrative way of landing the night before the big battle, but execution maybe left something to be desired. But I think that maybe that's,
I like
that's
that perspective.
Yeah,
I like that perspective quite a bit, actually. Yeah, I like that. So my question for you, you caused me to basically steal one of my questions, but as we've been going on, I've kind of remodeled it, and so I'm still going back to this. So I know that they were planning on 6 of these at least. I know, we both know from the ending that they were setting up part 3 I am not sure that Netflix is going to give them the opportunity to do part 3, right?
Why
So
not?
I'm probably wrong, but I'm thinking maybe. But if they were, I'm
Yeah.
curious to know, like when Gunnar is dying, Cora says, "Can't I have this one thing?" Like
Mhm.
it's like everything in her life
Right.
had seemed to come together around that relationship, and she's not going to get it, and he dies. If they were to make part 3, what do
Yeah.
you think the loss of Gunnar in her life will do to Cora and who she is and how she approaches everything?
Well, I think the journey we're supposed to see her on is a desire to leave everything behind. That the one person she thought she could trust was this adopted dad who ended up blaming the
Mhm,
murder of the royal family completely on her.
mhm.
And she then goes into hiding, wanting to live a different kind of life. And so I think Gunner is supposed to symbolize that otherness, that other life that is possible. But when he's gone, I think that for her is that other type of life disappearing. And so I think
Yeah.
in act 3, were we to get it, we would see her just going for a full force into Scargiver mode as she goes
Right.
after her adoptive father. And I think that then part 3 is a vengeance movie where we see her going back and trying to get vengeance both for the framing of her for the death of the royal family
Mhm.
and for the loss of this one chance she perceives she has at a kind of quote unquote normal life. That's what I think we would
Yeah.
see in part
Yeah.
3 and what kind of impact that would have. What do you think?
I completely agree. We've already pointed out that Snyder tends to repeat his story arcs, just like part 1 and part 2. And I think we would see the same story arc. Like she thought she was part of a family. She lost
Yeah.
that family. She hardens herself. She goes to the outsides of society and becomes sort of a scoundrel of sorts. And I think we'd see her harden herself again, go to the outskirts of society. And like you said, I think that she would kind of go on a vengeance tour. I do think, based on what we've seen in the story arc, that we would see, whether it would be in part 3 or part 4, like that's ever going to freaking happen. But we would see her story arc come back to recognizing that she doesn't have to be an outsider, and that there is the real possibility of family and having people who genuinely care about you, and having a life that doesn't have to be so vengeful and all about um, um, exacting your negative feelings about the way people have been treating you. So I think that that's where he would go with it, but who knows, man, right?
And I think that I kind of hope that we don't get to find out one way or another, but
No,
who knows? Who knows? So,
right.
but Mark, we have made it through Rebel
Mm,
Moon, and I think we've found some things to talk about, and I appreciate that. But you know what makes me really glad, Mark, that we don't have to
yes.
talk about it again next week.
I so agree.
So we were kind of chatting ahead of time, ahead of the
Yeah.
show, and we were talking about how much we both enjoyed Fallout based
Oh
on
man,
the
so
video
good.
games. Does that sound like a good one to talk about next
I
week?
would love to talk, man. It's such the antithesis of Rebel Moon. There's so much good in there. There's so much stuff to celebrate. There's so much great storyline. Yes, yes, 100% yes.
Okay, wonderful. So next week we'll talk about Fallout. And did you ever play the game? Were you a Fallout
I
gamer?
never did.
Yeah.
It was one of the rare popular games that I never got into. It just happened during a part in my life where I was really heavily into the business world, and I was so obsessed with being successful there that I had kind of walked away from video games. This though, this show, I'm going to be going out and getting some retro consoles and playing this stuff for sure. It looks incredible.
Yeah, I'm excited. I really enjoyed the first couple of shows. I haven't watched the whole season yet, but I will.
Did you play them?
I didn't.
Okay.
I missed out on this, so I'm kind of
Yeah, me
bummed too
too.
because I've really enjoyed the show. So,
Mhm.
I think I might go and play some too. Okay,
Yeah, there
but
you go.
for now, let's make sure that we're caught up on Fallout. You've watched it all. I haven't, but if you
Yep.
haven't watched that, I hope that you out there listening will go and watch Fallout.
It is
Nope.
well worth it. We promise. It's so good.
It's going to be fun. So it's going to be the opposite of Rebel Moon. Like
Yes, it will.
if you want some kind of something to compare it to, it's going to be the opposite of Rebel Moon. It's going to be a
There
lot of
you
fun.
go.
We're going to enjoy it. So we'll see you next time on the Moonshine Jesus Show.
Moonshine Jesus.